I never thought I would become the villain in my own story. I always imagined that villains were people out there somewhere, strangers with no conscience, people you read about in headlines or whisper about at dinner parties. I never imagined that the person who would destroy my family, my marriage, my entire identity, would be me. My name is Daniel, and this is my confession. Not because I deserve sympathy, not because I am looking for forgiveness. I am telling you this because I need you to understand what happens when you let your ego convince you that you deserve more than what you already have. What happens when you start believing the lies you tell yourself? What happens when you trade everything real for something that was never real at all? 3 years ago, I had a life that most people would envy. I was 33 years old, working as a senior consultant at one of the most prestigious management consulting firms in Boston. I had a corner office on the 17th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the harbor. I had a salary that allowed me to live in a beautiful townhouse in Back Bay, drive a car I never had to think twice about, and take my family on vacations to places I had only dreamed about as a kid growing up in a cramped apartment in Worcester. But none of those things were my real treasures. My real treasure was waiting for me every night when I walked through that front door. My wife Sophie, and my daughter Emma. Sophie and I met in college. She was studying to become a teacher, and I was convinced I was going to conquer the world of business. She was the kind of woman who made a room brighter just by being in it. She had this way of listening to you that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. When she looked at me, I felt seen. Really seen. Not for what I could achieve or what I could provide, but for who I actually was underneath all the ambition and the striving. She fell in love with the real me, the one I tried so hard to hide from everyone else. And I fell in love with her so completely that I proposed to her on the night of our graduation, on our knees in the rain outside the library, where we had our first study date. She said yes before I could even finish the question. We got married a year later in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Connecticut. It was perfect. Simple and perfect. Her dress was simple. The flowers were from her mother's garden. The vows we wrote ourselves. I promised her that I would always put her first, that I would always be honest, that I would spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of the love she was giving me. I meant every single word. At least I thought I did. Emma came along 4 years into our marriage, and she changed everything. She had Sophie's eyes, these big brown pools of innocence that could melt away any stress I carried home from the office. From the moment I held her for the first time, I knew that my entire purpose in life had shifted. It was no longer about climbing corporate ladders or impressing senior partners. It was about being there for this tiny human who looked at me like I was her entire world. I was her daddy, her hero, the man who would always protect her. For a while I lived up to that. For a while, I was exactly the husband and father I had promised to be. Sophie and I would put Emma to bed together, reading her stories until her eyes grew heavy, and then we would curl up on the couch with a glass of wine and talk about our days. We laughed a lot. We touched each other a lot, not just physically, but emotionally. We were connected in a way that felt unbreakable, but then something started to shift. It was so gradual that I did not even notice it at first. The firm had been going through changes. New management came in with aggressive growth targets. The pressure to perform increased exponentially. Suddenly, the 50-hour weeks became 60 hours, then 70. I started missing dinners, missing bedtime stories, missing the little moments that used to be the foundation of my happiness. Sophie was patient at first. She understood that I was working hard for our family, that the sacrifices were temporary, that things would ease up eventually. But they never did. The more I achieved, the more was expected of me. And the more I worked, the more disconnected I became from the life I was supposedly working so hard to protect. I started to resent coming home. Not because I did not love my family. I did. But because coming home meant facing the guilt. The guilt of seeing Sophie's tired eyes, of seeing Emma already asleep, of knowing that I had broken another promise. It was easier to stay late at the office where I could bury myself in spreadsheets and strategy documents and pretend that I was doing something important. At the office, I was successful. I was respected. I was somebody. At home, I was just a disappointment. That is the mindset I was in when Victoria Crane walked into my life. She had transferred from our London office, a senior consultant with a reputation for being brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. The first time I met her was at a partners meeting where she was presenting a new client acquisition strategy. She commanded the room in a way I had never seen before. She was confident without being arrogant, sharp without being cold. When she spoke, everyone listened, and when her eyes met mine across the conference table, something shifted in my chest that I did not understand at the time. Nothing happened at first. We were colleagues, nothing more. We were assigned to work together on a major account, a tech company looking to restructure their entire operation. The project required long hours and close collaboration, late nights reviewing documents, early morning strategy sessions, lunches at our desks, side by side, talking through problems. At first, I told myself that I was just being a good colleague, that the connection I felt with Victoria was purely professional, that the way she made me feel was nothing to worry about. But there were signs, small signs that I chose to ignore. The way I would check my reflection in the elevator doors before meetings with her. The way I started wearing my better suits on days I knew we would be working together. The way my heart would speed up when I saw her name appear on my phone. The way I started comparing the conversations I had with her to the ones I had with Sophie, and finding Sophie's wanting. Not because Sophie had changed, but because I had. Victoria had a way of making me feel like the best version of myself. She laughed at my jokes. She asked about my opinions. She looked at me like I was fascinating, like every word I said mattered. With Sophie, I felt like a failure who was never quite enough. With Victoria, I felt like a success, like someone worth knowing. It was intoxicating, that feeling. Like a drug I did not know I had been craving. The first time we crossed a line, it was almost accidental. We had been working late, just the two of us in the office. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. We were exhausted and punchy, laughing about some ridiculous email from a difficult client. And then suddenly, we were not laughing anymore. She was looking at me with something in her eyes that I recognized but had not seen in a long time. Desire. Pure, undisguised desire. I should have walked away. I should have made an excuse, gathered my things, and gone home to my wife and daughter. Instead, I kissed her. I kissed her in that empty office, with the city lights glittering through the windows, and in that moment, I felt more alive than I had in years. I felt wanted, chosen, special. I told myself that it was just a kiss, that it did not mean anything, that I would never let it happen again. But even as I told myself that, I knew it was a lie. I knew that I had just stepped onto a path that would lead somewhere I could never come back from. The affair started slowly at first. Stolen moments in empty conference rooms, lunches that stretched too long, texts that I deleted as soon as I read them. I became an expert at lying. I would tell Sophie that I had a client dinner when I was really with Victoria. I would say I was working late when I was actually at her apartment. I would kiss my daughter goodnight, tucking her in with promises of a bedtime story, and then slip out the door to meet another woman. Every lie I told chipped away at something inside me, but I kept telling them anyway. Because the alternative was facing what I was becoming, and I was not ready to do that. Victoria was different from Sophie in every way. Where Sophie was warm and nurturing, Victoria was cool and exciting. Where Sophie represented stability and responsibility, Victoria represented freedom and escape. Being with her felt like stepping into a different life. One where I was not weighed down by expectations and obligations. One where I could be anyone I wanted to be. I convinced myself that I deserved this. That after all the years of sacrifice and hard work, I had earned the right to take something for myself. I convinced myself that as long as Sophie did not know, no one was getting hurt. I convinced myself of 1,000 different things that allowed me to keep living my double life without drowning in the shame of it. But here is what no one tells you about living a lie. It changes you. Not just your actions, but your entire personality. I became irritable and distant at home. I started picking fights with Sophie over nothing, subconsciously trying to create distance so that my betrayal would feel more justified. I started looking at her with resentment, as if she were the reason I had to sneak around, as if she were the obstacle to my happiness rather than the victim of my choices. I stopped being the father Emma deserved. I was there physically sometimes, but I was never really present. My mind was always somewhere else. Someone else. My best friend Marcus noticed the changes before anyone else. We had known each other since we were kids, grew up on the same street, went to the same schools, stood beside each other at our weddings. He knew me better than I knew myself sometimes. We were having dinner one night, just the two of us at a bar we used to frequent back in our 20s, when he looked at me with an expression I had never seen from him before. It was disappointment. Pure disappointment. He said he had seen me at a restaurant the week before. He had been there with a client sitting in the back, and he had watched me walk in with Victoria. He had watched us sit in a corner booth. He had watched the way I touched her hand, the way I leaned in close, the way I looked at her. He had watched me kiss her before I got up to leave. He said he had been hoping there was an explanation, some innocent reason that made sense. But the look on my face told him everything he needed to know. I tried to explain. I tried to tell him that it was complicated, that he did not understand, that things with Sophie had been difficult. But even as the words came out of my mouth, they sounded pathetic. They were pathetic. Marcus just shook his head. He told me that I was not the man he thought he knew. He told me that Sophie was a good woman, a good mother, and that she did not deserve this. He told me that Emma did not deserve a father who would throw away her family for an office fling. And then he told me that I had 1 month. 1 month to end the affair and confess to Sophie, or he would tell her himself. He said it was not a threat. It was a promise. Because he loved Sophie like a sister, and he would not stand by and watch me destroy her. I should have listened to him. I should have seen that moment for what it was. A lifeline. A chance to pull myself back from the edge before it was too late. Instead, I got angry. I told him to mind his own business. I told him that he had no right to interfere in my marriage. I told him that if he said anything to Sophie, our friendship was over. He looked at me with such sadness in his eyes. Not anger, not judgment, just sadness. And then he walked out of that bar, and I did not hear from him for 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I should have been figuring out how to end the affair. I should have been preparing to tell Sophie the truth. Instead, I doubled down on my delusions. I convinced myself that Marcus was being self-righteous, that he did not understand what it was like to be in a marriage that had grown stale, that he had no right to judge me. I spent more time with Victoria than ever, as if proving to myself that what we had was real, that it was worth the risk. I started imagining a different future, one where I left Sophie and started over with Victoria, one where I could have the excitement without the guilt, one where everyone would eventually understand and forgive me. But then something happened that shattered every illusion I had been clinging to. Victoria and I were at her apartment one evening when her phone rang. She answered it, stepping into the other room, but she had not closed the door all the way. I heard fragments of the conversation, enough to understand. She was talking to someone about the Henderson account. The Henderson account was the biggest client at our firm, worth millions in annual revenue. It was also the account that I had been leading for the past 2 years. The account that had earned me my reputation and my position in the company. I heard Victoria talking about strategy documents, proprietary information, client relationships, and I heard her talking about me, not with affection, not with any of the warmth she showed when we were together. She was talking about me like I was a tool, an asset, something to be used. She said that getting close to me had been easier than expected, that my ego made me predictable, that once she had access to enough information, she would not need me anymore. I felt the floor drop out from under me. For a long moment, I just stood there, unable to process what I was hearing. The woman I had risked everything for was not in love with me. She had never been in love with me. I was a pawn in some game I did not understand, a means to an end that had nothing to do with romance or passion or anything real. Everything she had said to me, every look, every touch, every whispered promise, had all been calculated, all been fake. When she came back into the room, I pretended I had not heard anything. I made some excuse about having to leave early and got out of there as fast as I could. I drove around the city for hours that night, unable to go home, unable to face the truth of what I had done. I had betrayed my wife. I had endangered my marriage. I had risked my relationship with my daughter. And for what? For a woman who had been using me from the very beginning. For a fantasy that had never been real. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and panic. I started digging into Victoria's background, trying to understand what she was really after. What I found made me sick to my stomach. She had done this before. At her previous firm in London, she had cultivated relationships with senior consultants, gaining access to confidential information that she then used to advance her own position. She had a pattern of identifying vulnerable men with big egos and cracks in their marriages, and exploiting them for professional gain. I was not special. I was just the latest in a long line of fools who had fallen for her act. I confronted her the next time we were alone. I told her I knew what she was doing. I expected her to deny it, to try to explain, to at least pretend that some part of what we had was real. Instead, she just smiled. This cold, amused smile that I had never seen before. She told me that I was smarter than she had given me credit for, but not smart enough. She told me that she already had everything she needed. Emails, documents, recordings of conversations where I had shared confidential client information, thinking I was just venting to someone who understood. She told me that if I tried to expose her, she would destroy me first. She would go to the partners and tell them that I had been the one leaking information. She would go to Sophie and tell her about the affair, with evidence. She would make sure that I lost everything. I stood there in her apartment, the same apartment where I had whispered promises of love and imagined a future together, and I realized that I was completely trapped. I had created this prison myself, brick by brick, lie by lie. And now there was no way out that did not involve total destruction. For weeks I lived in a state of constant terror. I went to work every day, pretending everything was normal, while Victoria watched me with that knowing smile. I went home every night, kissing Sophie hello, playing with Emma, maintaining the facade of a happy family while my insides twisted with guilt and fear. I started losing sleep, losing weight. I would look at myself in the mirror and not recognize the person staring back. This was not who I was supposed to be. This was not the life I was supposed to be living. Marcus reached out to me during this time. He sent a text asking if we could talk. I knew his deadline was approaching. 1 month to tell Sophie or he would do it himself. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, to confess not just the affair, but Victoria's manipulation, to ask for his help in figuring out what to do. But my pride would not let me. My shame would not let me. I ignored his messages and kept sinking deeper into the quicksand of my own making. And then Sophie found out. Not from Marcus, Not from Victoria. From me. From my own carelessness. It was a Saturday morning. Emma was at a birthday party, and Sophie and I were home alone for the first time in weeks. She was doing laundry, and I was in the shower, trying to wash away the exhaustion that had become my constant companion. I had left my phone on the kitchen counter. I never did that. I always kept my phone close, always made sure to delete anything incriminating. But that morning, I was so tired, so worn down, that I forgot. I forgot to clear my messages from the night before. Messages from Victoria. Messages that left no room for misunderstanding. When I came downstairs, Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table. My phone was in front of her. Her face was pale, so pale it was almost gray. Her hands were trembling, but it was her eyes that destroyed me. They were not angry. They were not even crying. They were just empty, like something inside her had broken and could not be fixed. She asked me one question. She asked me if it was true. I could have lied. I could have made up some excuse, claimed the messages were taken out of context, bought myself more time. But I was so tired of lying, so tired of carrying the weight of all my deceptions. So I told her the truth. I sat down across from her and told her everything. The affair. How long it had been going on. How many times I had lied to her face. I did not tell her about Victoria's manipulation, about the blackmail, about any of that. Because in that moment, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was that I had betrayed my wife, and she finally knew. Sophie did not scream. She did not throw things or call me names. She just sat there, absorbing the words like blows, each one landing with visible impact. When I finished talking, there was a long silence, the kind of silence that feels like the end of the world. And then she said something that I will never forget, for as long as I live. She said that she had known something was wrong. For months, she had felt me pulling away, felt the distance growing between us. She had blamed herself. She had wondered what she was doing wrong, why she could not make me happy anymore. She had cried herself to sleep so many nights, trying to figure out how to save our marriage, never knowing that I had already given up on us. That was the moment when the full weight of what I had done finally hit me. I had not just betrayed Sophie with another woman. I had made her doubt herself. I had made her question her own worth. I had taken this beautiful, loving woman who had given me everything, and I had made her feel like she was not enough. And all the while, she had been trying to fix something that was never her fault to begin with. I tried to apologize. The words felt hollow even as I said them. What could I possibly say that would make any of this okay? Nothing. There was nothing. Sophie listened to my pathetic attempts at explanation, and then she stood up from the table. She told me that she needed me to leave. Not forever, maybe, but for now. She could not look at me. She could not be in the same house with me. She needed time to think, time to process, time to figure out what came next. I packed a bag while Sophie sat in the living room, staring at nothing. When I came downstairs, I asked if I could at least say goodbye to Emma when she got home from the party. Sophie shook her head. She said that Emma would ask questions that Sophie was not ready to answer. She said that until we figured out what we were going to tell our daughter, it was better if I just disappeared for a while. Disappeared. Like I was a ghost. Like I was already gone. I stayed at a hotel that first night. An anonymous room with a view of the highway. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, trying to understand how I had gotten here. How the man who had promised Sophie forever had become the man who could not even say goodbye to his own daughter. I thought about calling Victoria, confronting her again, demanding that she give me back the evidence she had collected. But what was the point? Even if she destroyed everything, the damage was already done. My marriage was over. My family was shattered. No amount of deleted emails could change that. The next few weeks were the darkest of my life. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. I went to work every day because I did not know what else to do, but I was barely functional. Victoria acted like nothing had happened between us, which somehow made everything worse. She had moved on to her next project, her next target, and I was just yesterday's news. The partners started noticing that something was off with me. My performance was slipping. My attention was scattered. They called me into a meeting and asked if everything was all right. I told them I was going through a divorce. They nodded sympathetically and told me to take whatever time I needed. But I could see in their eyes that they were already wondering if I was still worth the investment. Marcus came to see me eventually. He showed up at my apartment one evening, unannounced, with a bottle of whiskey and a look on his face that told me he had heard everything. We sat together in my empty living room, and for the first time, I told him the whole story. Not just the affair, but Victoria's manipulation, the blackmail, all of it. I expected him to say, "I told you so." I expected him to remind me that he had warned me, that I had this coming. Instead, he just listened, and when I was done, he poured us both a drink and said that he was sorry. Not for me, for what I had done, but for the man I used to be, the man he grew up with, because that man was gone now, and he did not know if he was ever coming back. Sophie filed for divorce a month later. She was graceful about it, considering everything. She did not try to destroy me financially or take me for everything I had. She just wanted out. She wanted to be free of me and the pain I had caused. We agreed to shared custody of Emma, which meant that I would get to see my daughter every other weekend and one night a week. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was more than I deserved. The hardest part was telling Emma. Sophie and I did it together, sitting on the couch in the living room where we used to read bedtime stories. We told her that Mommy and Daddy loved her very much, but that we were not going to live together anymore. We told her that it was not her fault, that sometimes grown-ups have problems that they cannot fix, that she would still see both of us all the time. Emma listened with those big brown eyes, and then she asked the question that broke my heart into a million pieces. She asked if it was because Daddy was never home anymore. She asked if Daddy left because he did not want to be with us. I wanted to die in that moment. I wanted to disappear completely, to spare my daughter the pain of having a father like me. Instead, I held her and told her that I would always want to be with her, that I loved her more than anything in the world, that none of this was her fault. But even as I said the words, I knew that I had already failed her in ways that could never be undone. She would grow up knowing that her father had made a choice, and that choice was not her. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Sophie got the house. I got an empty apartment and a storage unit full of memories from a life that no longer existed. I saw Emma on my scheduled days, but it was never the same. She was guarded around me now, careful in a way that a 7-year-old should never have to be. She did not ask me to read her stories anymore. She did not curl up in my lap and tell me about her day. She was polite and distant, like I was a stranger she was obligated to spend time with rather than the father who used to be her whole world. Work became unbearable. Victoria was promoted 3 months after my divorce. She had used the information and connections she had gathered to position herself perfectly for a senior partner position. She got everything she wanted, and I got to watch it happen, powerless to do anything about it. The partners looked at her with admiration, never knowing how she had climbed to the top. And when they looked at me, they saw a declining asset, a man who had lost his edge, a liability rather than an opportunity. I resigned a year after the divorce. I could not sit in that office anymore, walking past Victoria in the hallways, pretending that my entire life had not imploded. I took a severance package and walked away from the career I had spent over a decade building. I told myself that I needed a fresh start, that I would reinvent myself. that this was the first step toward becoming a better person. But the truth was, I did not know how to become anyone different. I did not know how to exist without the identity I had created for myself. I had been a successful consultant, a married man, a father who came home to a family. Without those things, I was nobody. I was just a man sitting alone in a quiet apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of his own choices. The depression came gradually, and then all at once. I stopped going out, stopped exercising, stopped doing much of anything except lying on my couch and replaying every mistake I had ever made. I started drinking more than I should, numbing the pain with whiskey because it was easier than feeling it. My days blended together into an endless gray haze. I missed visits with Emma because I could not bring myself to get out of bed. Sophie would call, asking where I was, and I would make up excuses about work or illness. But she knew. She always knew. Marcus saved my life. I mean that literally. He came to my apartment one night because I had not answered my phone in 3 days. He used the spare key I had given him and found me in a state that I am still ashamed to describe. He did not lecture me. He did not judge me. He just sat down next to me and told me that I had a choice. I could keep sliding down this path until there was nothing left. Or I could fight to become someone worth being. He told me that Emma still loved me, even if she was too hurt to show it. He told me that I owed it to her to become the father she deserved, not the father I had been, the father I could still choose to be. Those words broke through something inside me. For the first time in months, I felt something other than numbness. I felt shame. Real, burning shame for what I had allowed myself to become. And beneath the shame, I felt the tiniest flicker of something that might have been hope. I started therapy the next week. Not because I believed it would work, but because I had run out of excuses not to try. My therapist was a quiet woman named Dr. Patel, who had a way of asking questions that cut straight to the truth. In our first session, she asked me why I had cheated on my wife. I gave her all the excuses I had given myself. The pressure at work, the distance in my marriage, the excitement of being wanted. She listened patiently, and then she asked me the question that changed everything. She asked me what I was really running from. I did not have an answer at first. But over the following weeks and months, we dug deeper. We talked about my childhood, about growing up with a father who was never satisfied, who made me feel like nothing I did was ever good enough. We talked about how I had built my entire identity around achievement and success, how I needed external validation to feel worthwhile. We talked about how when my marriage started to feel ordinary, I panicked. Because if I was not succeeding at being a husband, if Sophie was no longer looking at me with admiration, then who was I? The affair had not been about Victoria. It had been about me, about my desperate need to feel special, about my inability to love myself without someone else reflecting that love back to me. It was painful work, therapy. There were sessions where I cried so hard I could barely breathe. There were sessions where I sat in silence because the truth was too ugly to put into words. But slowly, something started to shift. I started to see myself clearly for the first time. Not the image I had created, not the successful consultant or the devoted husband or the doting father. The real me. The scared, insecure man who had sabotaged his own happiness because he did not believe he deserved it. I stopped drinking. I started exercising again. I got a job at a smaller consulting firm, nothing prestigious, just something to give my days structure and purpose. I showed up for my visits with Emma, every single one, even when she barely spoke to me. I brought her favorite snacks and asked about her school and told her stories about when I was a kid. She remained distant at first, wary of the father who had let her down so many times. But slowly, imperceptibly, the walls started to come down. The breakthrough came on a rainy Saturday afternoon about a year after I had started therapy. Emma and I were at my apartment, playing a board game that she had brought from her mother's house. She was winning, which she always did, and I was pretending to be frustrated. which always made her laugh. And then, out of nowhere, she asked me why I had left. Not in an accusing way, just curious. Like she had been holding the question inside for so long that it had finally found its way out. I put down the dice. I looked at my daughter, at her mother's eyes staring back at me, and I made a decision. I told her the truth. Not the whole truth. Not the details that were not appropriate for a child, but the essence of it. I told her that Daddy had made some very bad choices, that I had hurt Mommy in ways that could not be fixed, that I had been selfish and thoughtless, and that I had put my own wants ahead of our family. I told her that it was the biggest mistake of my life, and I told her that I was sorry, not just for leaving, but for all the times I was not there even when I was home, for all the bedtime stories I missed, for all the moments I was too busy or too distracted to be the father she deserved. Emma listened with that quiet intensity that had always been part of who she was. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. And then she said something that I will carry with me forever. She said that she was mad at me for a long time. She said that she thought maybe I left because she was not good enough. But then Mommy told her that sometimes people make mistakes that have nothing to do with the people they love. That I still loved her even though I had done bad things. And she decided to believe Mommy, because Mommy would never lie to her. Sophie. Even after everything I had done, she had protected our daughter from the worst of it. She had given Emma the gift of believing in her father, even when I had done nothing to deserve it. In that moment, I understood just how extraordinary the woman I had married really was, and I felt the weight of my choices more heavily than ever. I did not try to get Sophie back. I knew that door was closed forever. But I did ask if we could meet for coffee, just to talk. She agreed, and we sat across from each other in a quiet cafe on a Tuesday afternoon. She looked different than I remembered. There was a peace about her that had not been there during our marriage, a lightness in her eyes. She told me that she had started dating someone, a teacher at her school, a widower with 2 kids of his own. She said he was kind, that he showed up, that he made her feel valued. I wanted to be jealous. I wanted to feel some spark of possessiveness, some righteous anger at being replaced. But all I felt was relief. Relief that Sophie had found someone who would treat her the way she deserved. Relief that Emma would have a positive male role model in her life. Relief that my mistakes would not define their future. I told Sophie that I was sorry. I had said those words before, many times, but this time they felt different. This time, I was not apologizing to make myself feel better, or to try to fix what was broken. I was apologizing because she deserved to hear it. Because I finally understood the magnitude of what I had taken from her. Her trust, her security, her belief in love. She had built a life with me on the foundation of my promises, and I had burned it all down. Sophie looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something that I did not expect. She said that she forgave me, not for my sake, for hers. She said that carrying anger was exhausting, and she did not want to spend the rest of her life being bitter about something she could not change. She said that I was Emma's father, and that meant we would be connected forever. And she wanted that connection to be peaceful, for Emma's sake, and for her own. I walked home from that cafe feeling something I had not felt in years. Forgiveness. Not from Sophie, though that was part of it. But forgiveness from myself. Not absolution for what I had done. I would carry that guilt forever, as I should. But permission to keep living. Permission to keep trying to be better. Permission to believe that the worst thing I had ever done did not have to define the rest of my life. The years that followed were a slow process of rebuilding. I kept showing up for Emma, week after week, earning back her trust one small moment at a time. We developed our own rituals. Saturday morning pancakes at a diner near my apartment. Sunday afternoon movies at the little theater downtown. Long walks where she would tell me about her friends and her teachers and her dreams for the future. She stopped being distant. She started being my daughter again. I watched her grow up from a careful distance. Watched her learn to ride a bike, then learn to drive. Watched her navigate friendships and heartbreaks and all the messy, beautiful chaos of adolescence. I was not her primary parent. I would never be. But I was present. I was reliable. I was there. Sophie married the teacher 2 years after our divorce was finalized. I was not invited to the wedding, of course, but Emma showed me pictures. Her mother looked radiant. Happy in a way she had not been happy with me for years, maybe ever. The new husband, Tom, seemed like a good man. He was patient with Emma, kind to Sophie, and he never tried to replace me as Emma's father. We shook hands at Emma's 8th grade graduation and agreed that our only job was to love the same child. It was enough. As for Victoria, karma came for her eventually. It always does. 3 years after I left the firm, a scandal broke. Turned out I was not the only person she had manipulated. Another consultant, someone at a competitor firm, had kept records, emails, messages, evidence of everything she had done. He went to the press, and the story exploded. Victoria was exposed as a corporate spy and manipulator who had built her entire career on other people's work and stolen information. She was fired. She was blacklisted from the industry. The last I heard, she had moved overseas to escape the fallout. I would be lying if I said I did not feel satisfaction when I heard the news. Part of me, the petty part, was glad to see her suffer the way I had suffered. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of the whole sordid chapter of my life. Tired of carrying the anger and the resentment. So I let it go. I let her go. I decided that whatever Victoria was dealing with was her own karma to reckon with, and I had enough work to do on my own soul without adding her to the burden. Emma is 23 now. She graduated from college last spring, magna cum laude, just like her mother. She is going to law school in the fall, following in Marcus's footsteps. She calls me once a week, just to check in, and she comes to visit when she can. We still do pancakes on Saturday mornings when she is in town. We still go for long walks and talk about life. She knows the whole story now, the full truth about what I did and why her parents divorced. I told her myself, on her 18th birthday, because I wanted her to hear it from me rather than discovering it some other way. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. And then she said that she had known. Not the details, but the general shape of it. She had figured it out over the years, putting together pieces from overheard conversations and her own observations. She said that she had been angry for a long time, that there were years when she hated me, even while she was pretending everything was fine. But she also said that she watched me change, watched me become a better person, watched me show up day after day, even when she made it hard. And she decided that people were more than their worst moments, that I was more than my worst moment. I cried when she said that. I am not ashamed to admit it. I cried because it was the redemption I had been working toward for over a decade. Not from Sophie, though her forgiveness had been a gift. Not from the world, which would always judge me for my failures, but from my daughter. From the person whose opinion mattered more to me than anyone else's. She saw me clearly, flaws and all, and she still chose to love me. I am telling you this story not because I want sympathy. I destroyed my own life. I made choices that hurt the people I loved most in the world. I cheated, and I lied, and I became someone I did not recognize. Those are facts that I cannot change, and that I will live with forever. But I am also telling you this story because I know there are people listening who are standing at crossroads similar to the ones I faced. People who are tempted to step outside their marriages, to chase excitement, to tell themselves that no one will get hurt. I am here to tell you that everyone gets hurt. You will hurt your partner. You will hurt your children. You will hurt yourself in ways you cannot imagine right now. The grass is not greener on the other side. It is just different grass. And when you get there, when you have burned down everything you built to reach that other side, you will discover that the new grass is not as green as you thought. It is brown and dying, because nothing grows in soil fertilized by betrayal. I lost who I was because I convinced myself that I deserved more than what I had. But I already had everything. I had a wife who loved me, a daughter who adored me, a life that, while imperfect, was full of the kind of quiet joy that most people spend their whole lives searching for. I traded all of that for a fantasy, and the fantasy was a lie. Now, at 46, I am finally at peace. Not happy exactly. Happiness feels like too simple a word for the complicated mix of emotions I carry. But at peace. I have a life that I built from the ashes of my old one. I have a relationship with my daughter that, while different from what it might have been, is real and honest and true. I have the knowledge that I did the work, that I faced my demons and came out the other side as someone I can live with. Sophie is happy. Emma is thriving. And I am here, telling you my story, hoping that something in these words might reach someone who needs to hear them, before it is too late, before you make the same mistakes I made, before you lose who you are in pursuit of something that was never worth having. I cheated my way into regret. I lost who I was. But in the end, through years of pain and growth and relentless effort, I found my way back to someone worth being. Not the man I was before. That man is gone forever. But someone new. Someone better. Someone who finally understands that the greatest achievement in life is not what you build in the outside world. It is who you become on the inside. And that is the truth I leave you with tonight. The only truth that matters. We are all more than our worst moments. But we only earn that grace by doing the work. By facing the consequences of our actions, by showing up day after day, even when it is hard, even when we want to give up. Redemption is not given. It is earned. One choice at a time, one day at a time. For the rest of your life, I am still earning mine. Thank you for listening.